Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Stephen Aldana. I wanted to welcome you to the WellSteps webinar, The 5 Keys to Effective Health Coaching. Look at the evidence. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Troy Adams, our Chief Operating Officer. This is going to be a tour de force for all of us today. I've been through the slides in advance, and it takes a lot to impress me. I'm impressed. So we've got about 900 people registered for this webinar, which is a large group. All of your phones have been muted and all of your microphones, but as you'll notice on your screen, there is a control panel on the far right side. We welcome any of your questions at any time. If you want to ask a question, just go ahead and click on the questions button on the far right, ask your question. Myself and one of our WellSteps guides, Jenny Irvine, are behind the scenes. We'll be triaging and looking through your questions during the entire webinar. The slides for today's webinar, as always, have been posted at the wellsteps.com page. Just go to wellsteps.com and click on the webinars link, and you'll be able to download the slides. They've been posted there now, and just a few minutes after the webinar, the entire video will be archived also, so you can watch a video of the webinar. We have suffered from some of the side effects of technology from around the globe, so we want to apologize. I know some of you are trying to reach us from abroad, from outside the US. With only a few exceptions, we have blocked every international IP address who tries to access our WellSteps site. Even though there are some that are there for good reasons, there's an awful lot of hanky-panky going on out there. And I sleep better knowing we've blocked most of the more nefarious places around the world from accessing our site. So if you're one of those and you've tried to go to our website, you can't. But you can still register for the webinar, as you know that. With that, I want to just introduce Dr. Troy Adams, who has spent an enormous amount of time reviewing literally hundreds of articles regarding the impact of health coaching. The reason that Troy has done that, and the reason that we do this in our webinars, is we're both academics, having spent almost 40 years in academia on the research side. We want to know, if we're going to do a good wellness program, what works, what doesn't, and how can we make it better? So our push to explore the evidence and the science comes from our desire to provide the best programs scientifically possible. To do that, we have to review what's already been published. That's the easy part. The hard part then is to take that information and integrate it into our programs that touch live people every single day. But that's why we do that. Dr. Troy Adams got his PhD at UT Austin, at University of Texas at Austin. As I mentioned earlier, he's the Chief Operating Officer at WellSteps, and he oversees the WellSteps delivery of our wellness solutions to hundreds of companies across the United States and even in some other countries. He spent a lot of time on this particular webinar because we've had a lot of interest from not only clients but our own research that wants to know what's really working. So with that, I encourage you all to strap in, and I'm particularly excited about this one. Troy, we turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. For those of you who are playing webinar bingo today, make sure that you pencil in nefarious. Steve said nefarious in the introduction. That was a first. I would like to correct Steve. It was 40 years combined. I'm not that old, but God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll be here for a lot more years, helping to do good. So I want to start by just relating a brief story about 15 or 20 years ago. A guy named David Eisenberg. Some of you may recognize that name. He published a study about what he called unconventional medicine in the United States. And what he found was controversial. That's not the focus of this story. More visits to unconventional practitioners and primary care physicians, almost as much spending out of pocket for conventional care versus hospitalization, stuff like that. Anyway, it generated so much interest that there was a follow-up study later in which, instead of unconventional medicine, he used the term alternative medicine. So that's a nicer, friendlier term. And in a third follow-up study, he called it complementary medicine. I found this particularly interesting. So he went from unconventional to alternative to complementary medicine. Do you notice a subtle shift in the spin with each title? As I read these articles and continue to read these articles, my question is, what changed? Well, as more published data became available to Dr. Eisenberg and his team, he learned more, and as he did so, he began to see things differently. So I tell you this because this is the fourth webinar that I personally have done on the impact of coaching. I was pretty honest in the first webinar about the lack of evidence supporting the effectiveness of coaching, and I got in trouble by a lot of my colleagues who are health coaches. And to say that is an understatement. But and I say don't shoot the messenger. But here's the deal: we're at a different place in time. There are now more published studies on health coaching and its effectiveness, and it's become clear what makes coaching effective, or I should say, ineffective. So I am like David Eisenberg. I have come around, and I think health coaching can be an effective tool. So what I will hope to do in this webinar today is just talk about how. So here is where I hope to go today in this webinar. I want to start by reviewing what we know really quickly. Then we'll get to, and what I did is I reviewed all of the literature in the National Library of Medicine for the past few years, and so I want to review the literature reviews that have been done, and I want to do it quickly. I want to do it so short that you can tweet it out with characters to spare. We're going to talk about 5 keys to effective coaching. These are all based on literature, as I mentioned. It is interesting to me as I kind of came up with these keys, how consistent they are with the prevailing thoughts about where we need to head as an industry that were shared at the recent American Journal of Health Promotion conference. There also, I want to close with some ideas about how to improve health coaching as an intervention, again, based on the published evidence. So strap in, here we go, and just want to start by grounding us in the ultimate goal of all of this. Now remember that health coaching is just one of the many tools used to improve employee health, right? So as an industry, we have a lot of these tools. And as you know, our industry has a small handful of vocal critics who promote their own agenda, I think, by routinely citing poor evidence as proof that our wellness tools don't work. Using a yard maintenance as a metaphor, the critics like to say things like, well, your yard is a mess. So that proves that your shovel and your rake and your mower and your edger, they don't work. So you should stop using all of them for anything. Instead, you should use our tools because they're way better. So I'm sorry, critics, if you're on the webinar, I'm just telling it like it is. What they don't bother explaining is that sometimes wellness tools are incorrectly applied, then evaluated, and horror of horrors, believe it or not, they're actually published. It's sad but true. There are way too many documented cases of health coaching gone wrong that are in the literature. In fact, there are more than the effective studies, but we're going to focus on the effective studies today. Here's what it really boils down to. Employee health-related costs are driven by chronic disease, risk, and ultimately unhealthy behaviors. So when we're talking about health coaching, we're talking about changing behavior. That should be the ultimate goal of any wellness program, and that's really hard to do if you rely on only one tool. So in that context, let's review what we know about one of the tools that's really popular, and that's health coaching. All right, so here's what we know. There was a review done in 2009. Here's where it was published. And all I'll tell you about this one is it included 2 studies. After all of the quality filters were applied, the evidence-based quality research was really too small to know anything. And that's what that tells us a little bit about is about the maturity and development of this tool. Coaching is a tool. In 2009, we didn't know much. In 2010, there was a review published in the American Journal of Health Promotion. It had 15 studies. The evidence base increased pretty quickly, but on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the best research design, less than half were a 4 or 5 research quality, and only 1 was a 5. I will also say that interesting, there was a review that looked at the design details of health coaching studies that was published last month in the American Journal of Health Promotion. Over half of the studies that they reviewed did not clearly define health coaching. And the number of sessions was widely variable, from 2 sessions to 48 sessions. So their conclusion, I think, stated simply is, we really don't know what we don't know, or what we know. They weren't able to really conclude much. Here's what we can learn from the 2010 review, though. We learned from this review that coaching was ineffective in 60% of the studies. In 40% of the studies, however, we learned that coaching had an impact on physical activity, nutrition, behavior, weight, and in medicine adherence. That's pretty good news. Um, then I would like to just quickly move on to a review that we did in 2011. I want to give a shout out to Lindsay Duffy, who's an employee of WellSteps. She helped me with this review as part of her internship project. Now, this is not really the focus of this webinar, but I just want to summarize this because I know that some of you weren't around 3 years ago, and you might be interested to know what we found. So what we did is we reviewed every article in the National Library of Medicine. We found 33 articles, but at the time, but only 10 focused on the impact of coaching on change in behavior and risk. We compared these outcomes, again, at this time, 2011, we compared these coaching studies against 25 that were based on group-oriented programs, most of which were from the CHIP program. Now, some of you might not be familiar with the CHIP program. It's now called the Complete Health Improvement Program. Now, it's not what it was originally titled, but that is what it has become. This is Dr. Hans Diel's group. He designed CHIP to reach large numbers of people in communities. He wanted to reach people at the same time and include group support as part of his intervention. It's a really, really fabulous model. So again, we compared coaching studies to group-based programs. We're looking at wellness programs with broad reach. We call these programs broad reach because they engage large groups of people. And this approach really makes a lot of sense if you consider two important facts. First of all, groups enable two of the most powerful motivators of behavior change. Think about it. Competition is huge. Peer support as well. A competition is a huge deal. Never underestimate the motive value of smack talk, right? I mean, people love to smack talk. What about support? Well, you can get support with coaching, but it's one-on-one, so it can be pretty expensive. Now, we'll talk about this more in just a little bit. But the idea that good things happen in groups makes sense from a cost-effectiveness standpoint because you have greater economy of scale. It also makes sense from an effectiveness standpoint, meaning that it works better when you consider the second point. The secret of lifestyle prescription. The secret of lifestyle prescription is that whether you are a heart patient, you're at cardiac risk, or you're just interested in preventing heart disease, the same core behaviors are indicated, right? Eat healthy, move more, and be tobacco free. This is one of the things that makes a lifestyle coaching interaction so much different than a medical interaction. Coaching done right is always about lifestyle change. And that's not always the case with medical interactions. Also, and I've got to stick this in somewhere, medicine is supported by a very complex reimbursement system, the health insurance system. Health coaching doesn't have that luxury, so somebody's got to pay. And I'll leave that one hanging for now, but we may come back to that. So the idea that good things happen in groups and lifestyle prescription is that lifestyle prescription is very similar, no matter where you are on the process. We'll just call it the disease life cycle. Suggests that a group-based approach to wellness makes a lot of sense. I digress a little bit. Let's go back to this review. Here's what we learned from the 2011 review. We learned quickly that group-based programs resulted in triple the physical activity effect compared to coaching interventions. This is what got me in a lot of trouble. I'm going to come around, I promise. We also learned that in smoking interventions, group participants were 2 times more likely to be off tobacco at 4 weeks. Finally, we learned that for cholesterol, LDL, body mass index, and blood pressure, really they were about the same. Cholesterol and LDL were pretty identical. Blood pressure was very similar, a little bit different. Actually favored in the coaching intervention. There was a greater reduction, very small coaching reduction in the coaching interventions. And body mass index was also very similar, but the cost for coaching was about $100 per kilogram lost, and it was substantially less in the group format. So what do we know altogether about coaching? You ready for it? This is what I promised you was coming. Here is your Twitter summary right here. The Twitter summary is that review number 1, we don't know much. Review 2 is promising but inconclusive. Review 3, group programs are better than coaching for exercise and smoking. There you go. So, all that said, the Well Steps review was updated through May 12th, that's very recently, of 2014. And we dropped the comparison to group programs. What I really wanted to find out in this review was how effective was health coaching. So I found 32 studies in the National Library of Medicine that assess the impact of any form of coaching on healthy lifestyle behaviors or on clinical outcomes. Thank heavens I'm no longer an academic, because if I were, I would drone on endlessly about the details and flaws of every single study, and you'd all be asleep by 10 minutes from now. But I promise I won't do that. I want to have a little bit of fun with this. I will summarize by saying that 18 of the 32 studies revealed that coaching had no effect. Again, does this mean the tool is ineffective? No. It just means the tool was used incorrectly and documented for the world to read 18 times. That's what it means. Think of the messy backyard metaphor I shared earlier. These studies are a bit like trying to use a lawnmower to prune a tree in a lot of cases. An effective tool used the wrong way. So just for that, I originally wanted to discuss these 18 studies in detail, but as I started doing so, I realized that they were ineffective for precisely the same reason that the 14 studies were effective. So what I decided to do instead was just talk about the 14 studies that were effective. So as the dude on American Idol says, dim the lights and here we go. We're going to get to everything that we know about health coaching, the 5 keys of effective health coaching. As a summary, this is where we are. Coach the Ready. Now, some of these may seem plainly intuitive, but I will say that these came from the literature, and I'll show you how. Make the healthy choice the easiest. Kudos to Michael O'Donnell of the American Journal of Health Promotion, who's been saying that for over 2 decades. Aim upstream. Support, 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 and then dose matters. So let's go over each of these in turn. First of all, Coach the Ready. In this first study, right here, the high risk were invited to coaching. Participation was voluntary, in other words. About 6% of the total population of around 114,000 opted in. Less than 1% went on to complete the coaching process. Now, in our experience, Steve and our experience reviewing many carrier programs, 1 to 3% participation is pretty typical. And in a lot of cases, they're discouraged by that, and they should be. But here's the deal. About 9 of the 10 volunteers in this study met at least one health improvement goal. Think about that. Now, it's really good. But here's the challenge as a researcher. Do you get excited about the success among a tiny fraction of the population? Well, if you do nothing for the rest of the population, in other words, you apply no other tools, I say the answer has to be no. But the main point here is that volunteers are most ready to change, even though using volunteers does not make for a fantastic research design. You'll see in this particular study, there was an increase in healthy eating and exercise, improvement in emotional health, and a decrease in stress levels. So yeah, that's great news. What else do we know about this? There was another study where they looked at patients who could either choose a diabetes coaching program or they had the choice, a heart healthy coaching program. Interestingly here, the control patients were those who declined to participate. I can hear researchers all over the globe pulling their hair out going, oh my gosh, it's a flaw in research design. Well, I'm here to tell you from a real world perspective, this actually makes a lot of sense. It's a great indication of readiness. Don't force people to do what they really don't want to do, right? What good can we gain from that? So a greater portion of participants in both treatment groups actually met clinical goals and reduced blood pressure, lipids, and hemoglobin A1C. So that's great news. In this third group, Coach the Ready, we're talking about, this study looked at cancer survivors. They had 11 sessions. This was done in Australia. The control condition was usual care, which always makes me laugh. I'll just leave that there. By definition, cancer survivors, I think, are more ready to change. And so this is actually one of the more effective studies in the literature. The vegetable intake, very consistent with good population health studies, increased about almost a half a serving a day, which is huge. Doesn't sound like much, but on a population basis, that's pretty big. They increased moderate physical activity by almost 30 minutes a week, which is fantastic. And they decreased fat and saturated fat intake, in their body mass index decreased as well. So altogether, these studies suggest that when people are allowed to opt in, are you with me, or are otherwise ready to change, good outcomes can be achieved. So I say, hooray, coach the ready. Let me show you how this might look. All right, so if you were to design an intervention that did exactly this, you're going to coach the ready. What you do is you get health assessment data. You drop it down the mouth of this funnel here, and you would wind up with coaching those who are medium and high risk. Now, on a population basis, what I did is I looked at data from the Healthy People 2020 and other sources. Now, on a national basis, here's what we're looking at. Here's the number of people who have risk. Anywhere from 1 in 5 have sleep problems or they're extremely stressed, and up to 3 in 4 don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. So on a population basis, the US population, here are the number of people that technically need health coaching, right? But then what you do, instead of coaching all those people, which is going to generate a lot of wasted time, you just focus on those who are ready to change, because that's going to be more effective. This is the mouth of right out of the Prochaska lab, who basically said in their decades of experience, right around 20%, about 1 in 5 are actually ready to change any behavior at any given time. So we've got the risk. Now we're going to coach the risk who are ready to change. This is going to be a more effective group, right? And then instead of just coaching them, let's just coach those who opt into coaching, who are ready to go right now, who are willing to share their data with the health coach. From our experience at WellSteps, that's about 50%. We looked at several of our customers. We're right around 47 to 50% of the people that said, yeah, I'm ready to share my data with the health coach. So all told, if you do the math, what winds up happening is you get about 2 to 7% of the total population who are ready to change, who are both at risk, ready to change, and who said, yeah, you can share my data with the health coach. 2 to 7%. What this means is you've got a highly motivated, ready to go population that is not as big as we might have otherwise assumed. But the results with this group will be better. The question becomes, what about everybody else? That is a great question. Well, that leads us to point number 2. Make the healthy choice the easiest choice. What do we know about free snacks? I can tell you, this has been scientifically proven. If you put stuff out on a break room table, it doesn't matter what it is, it'll get eaten. Brian Wasnick, the guy who did mindless eating, he has proved that over and over again. You put M&Ms out, they're going to get eaten. They'll get eaten really fast. But guess what happens if you put out this stuff? I've seen it with my own eyes. It gets eaten. It's amazing. It's miraculous. So on that vein, it's important for us as wellness professionals, brokers, members of carrier groups, we have many of you on today, to remember that the culture change bus, it's a true bus. I'd like to say that we've been talking about culture at WellSteps for about 7 years, and we're delighted to see many of you jumping on board with that. I think it's great. So one of the things that can be done for everyone else is to change the culture, right? So this first study, there wasn't much done on this area. There were 2 really good studies, though. This one looked at the household routines on the impact of obesity in kids. It was a 6-month intervention. The goal was to change household environment to encourage family meals, adequate sleep, limited TV time, and this is funny, getting the TV out of the bedroom. Like, how did it get there in the first place? But anyway, this was done by 3 things: motivational coaching at home and by phone. There was some stuff that was mailed in, and there were some text messages. So coaching was really embedded in a more comprehensive intervention. I can say that again and underscore it. Coaching was embedded in a more comprehensive intervention. At any rate, the net effect, which was difficult to attribute to coaching per se, was that increased sleep duration and decreased body mass index among kids. Again, the key point here is that coaching was a tool embedded within an environmental change. In the second study, this study looked at coaching plus change to the home environment as well. There were 2 home and 2 phone coaching visits to complete a home environmental profile. There was some goal setting, and there was also a behavior change contract. So I would say on a coaching basis, this was not a horribly intensive intervention, but there was some coaching done. So the intervention homes improved purchasing of fruits and vegetables and meals with the TV off. They also were better at preparing healthy meals. And these meals were supported by family, which was kind of huge. There was also a decrease in the percentage of fat intake. So I will say right here, this is being true to my researcher roots. There was no study that evaluated the impact of culture change plus coaching at the work site. Ding, 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 ding. If I were a researcher, I would pounce all over that one. We're pretty null and void in that particular area. So number 2, make healthiest choice the easiest choice. What this does, we've got coaching, which we use to target the really ready to go, but we're making the culture friendly and healthier for everybody else. That's just part of it. That's an important thing to do. Third, is to coach upstream. Now, coaching upstream, let me just show you a picture here. I will say that there are a lot of people out there who are interested in talking about disease management. In fact, as a sneak peek, I'm just going to say that Dr. Aldana is going to talk about disease management, the high risk, high cost employee next month. I'm really excited to hear what he shares. There's a lot of information out there, but lots of disease management oriented coaches is directed toward those with chronic disease because that's where all the action is, right? It's important to ask though, how do we arrive at the chronic disease waterfall in the first place? Well, we got there by unhealthy behaviors. We know, for example, healthy lifestyle prevents chronic disease and can even help reverse it once it has already occurred, right? So this is why aiming upstream makes so much sense from an effectiveness perspective. And surprisingly, not all the coaching literature really focuses on this because we're still doing a lot of disease management stuff. So improving behaviors will reduce chronic disease. It's plain and simple. So let's go over the evidence for that. All right. There were 3 studies that focused exclusively on modifiable behaviors, and all things considered, these studies, I think, had the best designs and outcomes. So this first study was about relatives from the previous study about cancer survivors. It was also done in Australia. These participants got 6 coaching sessions that were focused on lifestyle behaviors. Now, you could argue that they were also more ready to change because of what their loved one had experienced. And I will grant you that. That's probably true. But the coaching design was pretty dang cool, and it was all focused on helping them change lifestyle behaviors. The coaching was supported by a handbook, a pedometer, and some other stuff. In this particular case, they increased vegetable intake and exercise. I like to say they decreased their intake of hot dogs and booze. They seem to go together. They go hand in hand. It was processed meat and alcohol intake, to be more politically correct. But they also decreased their body mass index and waist circumference. What I found to be really impressive is that they were 1.2 to 4 times more likely to meet national lifestyle recommendations down in Australia. So that was pretty huge. The group that got coaching changed their behavior, plain and simple. All right, the second study, there was telephone coaching program for about 6 months. It was a translation, really, this one, of effective coaching model of population health. I think it was also done in Australia. Doing some great things down there in Australia. So the focus was entirely on modifiable behaviors. They used phone coaching. The results were really good. There was an increase in moderate and vigorous activity, increase in fruit and vegetable servings per day, a decrease in takeout meals and sweetened drinks, also in body weight, body mass index, and waist circumference. So third, this study looked at coaching plus mobile decision support plus incentives. It included adults with high saturated fat intake, I believe low fruit and vegetable intake, high sedentary leisure time, and conversely low physical activity. This was a pretty complicated study, but in summary, the participants were assigned to basically one of four treatment groups. And to be brief, the group which focused on increasing fruits and vegetables and decreasing physical activity improved the most. So, an increase in fruit and vegetable intake, it quadrupled. It's pretty significant. Sedentary leisure time decreased about 250%, and saturated fat intake decreased about 25%. So, in these coaching studies, the emphasis was upstream. It was on the behaviors that are ultimately going to cause chronic diseases. I found that to be extremely refreshing. Here are some of the upstream behaviors that you might focus on, or maybe you already do in your coaching program. Physical activity, decreasing sedentary activity, intake of healthy things, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, real whole grains, improving sleep quality, and reducing stress. All right, fourth, support, support, support. This is modeled on a famous real estate mantra: location, location, location. It winds up being really, really huge. I will say before we talk about support, there are a lot of ways that we could interpret these findings. But as I reviewed them carefully, both studies just screamed to me support. This is all about support. So in this first study, everyone in this study was included in a group weight loss program. Okay, but beyond that, everyone was also assigned to one of three coaching programs. One group was coached by professionals, one was coached by peers, and one was coached by mentors. Now, the professionals were trained health coaches. That should make you stand up and notice if you're a professional health coach. Peers were those who were just as clueless as the people enrolled in the program. They were just trying to do the same thing. They were just trying to change behavior, lose weight, those kind of things. The mentors, however, were untrained volunteers who had been there, done that. They're the ones standing up on top of the mountain saying, "Look at me, I've done it successfully. You should do it exactly like I did it." And it's interesting, when you look at the outcomes, there really was no statistical difference between those coached by the pros, the trained health coaches, and the peers. So there's really only one conclusion that I can come to. Now, I know that a lot of you are firing in alternative interpretations, and that's cool. That's why we have that feature in GoToWebinar. One of the reasons for the difference in outcomes may have been that the mentor's approach of "let me show how I did this," it might have been off-putting. The peer coaches produced about the same outcome as the professional coaches. Look at the results. The percent of body weight loss in the pros, it was 9.6%. In the peers, it was 9.1%, nearly double of the mentors. Also, the percent who lost 10% of their body weight, 56% among the pros, 50% among the peers, nearly as good. So that tells me the support, we're in this together, is huge. It's huge. I mean, nearly triple the effect in percent who lost 10% of the body weight for the pros and the peers versus the mentors. The difference in outcomes between the pros and the peers can be attributed to the training of the health coaches. The rest of it has to be support, from where I'm sitting anyway. Okay, this second study, there were also three groups. There was a generic content group, there was a tailored content group. This is written content, or tailored content plus peer coaching once again. The participants all set lifestyle goals, and there was no difference across groups for breakfast and exercising. They increased across the board for everybody. There were a lot of things going on in the study, but when you compare the groups that got tailored content with the group that got tailored content plus coaching, you can see that there was a difference in smoking abstinence. Smoking abstinence was double for tailored versus general content, which means tailored content is better than general. But the other conclusion you can draw is it was nearly double again for coaching versus tailored, which means that tailored content is great. It's a tool, right? The coaching is also a tool. Put them both together and you get better effects. That's the message here. I think it is really about coaching. I've discovered the word "and" is a really powerful word. It's not this or that. It's this and that. This is what this study proves. So support, I think, in this case, made a huge difference. The last key is that dose matters. Now, I will say there was a published paper. I'm going to have a hard time doing this without laughing. There was a published paper on a 15-minute coaching intervention to increase efficacy around physical activity. That's a fancy way of saying people got a pep talk for 15 minutes to move a little bit more, right? I've seen that intervention in many locker rooms growing up. It's called a pep talk. So it's no surprise that the effect reflected the dose. I think like everything else with coaching dose, there will be a point of diminishing returns. Obviously, you can't just keep providing coaching and keep getting effect. But 15 minutes? Really? Ah, my goodness. I was really surprised to see this study published. With that, I'm sorry for that little divergent path there. Let's look at some of the studies. There was a nice body of literature, 4 really good studies on the effect. Now, most of the effective studies were 6 weeks to 6 months. I will say a few were longer and more intense. And let me just point out again, I think there's a point of diminishing return. I think some of these studies might have pushed up against that. This first study was probably, if you're going to circle, this is probably the best, most effective study that I saw done. I talked about this in a previous webinar. It lasted 24 months. My opinion is that it might be a little bit too long. Naturally, in this study, because it was done in a medical environment, everybody got usual care. So technically, this was about coaching plus usual care versus usual care only, right? But the outcomes of interest were glycemic control and cardiovascular risks of diabetic participants. There were significant differences, decreases in weight, body mass index, waist circumference, hemoglobin, and overall energy intake. What I found fascinating, there was over a 7-fold difference in energy intake. This means that these people figured out calories. They got it, and they changed their behavior. I think it was something like they had decreased, those who got the coaching intervention decreased just over 500 kcals per day versus about 70 kcals. That sounds about right. Pretty phenomenal. When you add it up over long term, that is a huge, huge impact. Dose matters. The second study, there were also 3 groups in this study. There was a coaching group. There was a group that used a self-directed DVD. And again, usual care. The evaluation was after 15 months of intervention. So it was a pretty long intervention. The percent achieving a weight loss goal of 7%, that was the measure mark here, you can see that there was really no difference. No difference between the coaches and the self-directed DVD because the dose was exactly the same. Same relative dose. 37% achieved weight loss goal with coaches, 36% self-directed DVD, but big difference between those and usual care. Also, I should point out that waist circumference and fasting glucose levels decreased also. In this third study, there was 1 coaching session at baseline. That was a control condition. Then there were 8 coaching sessions over 6 months. The coaching group decreased intake of unhealthy fats, carbohydrates, cholesterol, sodium, and sugar, and they increased calcium intake when you adjusted for nutrient density. And then finally, this study was a 16-week intensive lifestyle change intervention. It included a social network, weekly lessons. This one was published very recently. It also included health coaching, a wireless scale, a pedometer, and lots of other fancy stuff. In this study, participants were sort of signed on for 16 weeks, but they could opt in to continue out to 12 months. So I'll just share the 16-week outcomes. Mostly, the weight loss of 5%. There was a weight loss of 5% at 16 weeks, and it was maintained out to 4.8% at 12 months. So really not much turning back because they were, again, focusing on changing lifestyle behaviors, right? So they evaluated those who made it to 12 months, and there really was not that much difference in the outcomes. So I chose not to share those in interest of time today. So let me just review these keys again. And again, these are evidence-based keys. Coach the ready. Make the healthiest choice the easiest. focus on upstream behaviors. Those are behaviors that have an impact on the occurrence of chronic disease, and I gave you a list of those. No matter how you design health coaching intervention, make sure there is support. That is probably one of the biggest things, and the dose does matter. I will say that it's my humble opinion that if we want coaching to be an effective tool in our wellness program toolbox, we probably have to apply these 5 keys. I'll also say about coaching dose that it looks like it's 4 sessions at 4 weeks is probably the bare minimum, but probably a better intervention is 6 coaching sessions delivered over 6 weeks. Better if you follow up out to 6 months, and then you're pretty rock solid. So coach the ready, provide something for everyone by minimally making the healthiest choice the easiest. Aim upstream. Some people say, well, what about diabetics? What about foot inspection behavior? If you're diabetic, you have problems with your feet and your eyes, and so there's a foot inspection behavior, but that's not an upstream behavior. Eating behavior is an upstream behavior. Both are modifiable, but eating behavior is way, way upstream. So those are the 5 keys. Let's talk a little bit in closing about improving coaching effectiveness. There were a couple of things that popped out here on this to me. Coaching has promises and tools. Really clear, really, really clear. But I think it can be done better. First of all, let me show it needs to be bolted to lifestyle, a comprehensive intervention. Let me show you what I mean. So again, we're talking about focusing on the high risk, as we've already discussed. Only a portion of these will be ready to change. So you see what happened? We went from a group of people who were ready for an intervention to a smaller group who were ready for an intervention. What you should have noticed is the number of people who are getting nothing, it changed a lot. So I think better than just changing the environment so that the people who are in shadows have a better opportunity to improve their health, why not provide a comprehensive solution for everybody? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? As we reduce the number of people we coach, again, we see that the effectiveness of coaching increases, but at the expense of reach. See, the biggest problem is that the high risk only approach does not do anything to keep the low risk low, as Dee Eddington has been so eloquently pounding on the pulpit saying for years. Most of you know about the data from Staywell that indicate about 60% of next year's high risk group will come from those who are low or medium risk this year, right? So a wellness program has got to reach everybody. It's got to be comprehensive. We need to keep the healthy, right? So coaching should be bolted onto a population-based approach as a tool, right? This makes perfect sense for those of us who've been delivering population-based programs for years, like Steve and I did in our academic work and that we've done with WellSteps. But it might make more sense if you think about wellness like an educational system for our kids. This seems apropos for me today because I've got a senior graduated from high school this evening. I have no idea where he is. I haven't seen him since 7 o'clock last night. Hopefully he'll make it to graduation. But imagine what would happen if we sent all our children to schools. Think about this. They each received an individualized educational prescription that was delivered to them one-on-one. A teacher delivered the educational intervention to your student one at a time. Now, most of us would like that, but I'm here to tell you, there is not enough property tax in Texas to pay for that. There's just no way. It would be really, really costly. Instead, what we do is we send our children to schools where they're embedded in classrooms. Hey, that makes sense. We give them a teacher, and here's the key. They have peers that are their same age, or that have their same interest. You see where I'm going with this? And in schools, by and large, the group approach works pretty well, and it's really cost effective. And I'll just say right now, we should pay teachers more. That's my little pet project. But what do we do with students who need extra help? Those are always going to pop up in a wellness program because it pops up in an educational setting, right? Well, we either send them to special classes or we get them a tutor. Let me show you what that means. So again, remember that the secret of lifestyle prescription is if you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or avoid diabetes, you wind up doing the same things. The parallels are obvious. But remember, The most effective way of delivering wellness in an organization is with a population-based approach. This also allows competition and support to work for you, since everyone needs basically the same things. In a wellness setting, they need to adopt and maintain the same core set of behaviors. But okay, what about the employees who need extra help? You might say. What about your classroom example? Well, boom, we have special classes for employees who need extra help. Or for those who need help another way, we provide a health tutor. We call it a health coach. And so in this manner, we've managed to provide something for everybody. We're moving to change help people adopt and maintain healthy behaviors. We're also trying to change the culture so that it supports those behaviors. We're providing access to services and tools that will help our employees who have special challenges or needs. And that's why they call it a comprehensive. They call this a comprehensive wellness program, because it's designed to move the whole ship all at the same time. So, improving coaching effectiveness, point number 2. I will say coaching will never be standardized. There's just no way. There's too much diversity in style. There's too many differences in philosophical approach, and I think that's great. I wouldn't want it to be standardized. But what we can improve in coaching is by moving toward a more standardized dose of coaching, at least an acceptable range that is sufficient to produce change, not 15 minutes. That's just not going to get it done. And again, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. About 4 sessions over 4 weeks is good. 6 sessions over 6 weeks is probably better, and follow-up should happen, I think, pointed to diminishing returns out to about 6 months. At that point, we ought to be talking about adopting and maintaining a new health behavior. That's how we're going to keep people moving in the right direction. Another way to tighten up the coaching model is to make sure that there is an outcome to report for every session. An outcome to report for every session. And here's how that this might work, or this might look. In a week 1, there might be clarifying life values to set a context for a health goal. Why am I setting a health goal? Well, because you want to live a long, healthy life and spend time with your grandkids. You want to go fishing. You want to do things that matter. In week number 2, and so we can measure how many people set a goal. That gives us a sense of how well our coaching outcome is going to be, right? So we're measuring process and outcome. SMART goals, action plan, support network, etc., and so on. So it's important that the coaching model have a measurable outcome in every week of the process, and also an outcome in terms of behavior change and clinical outcomes at the end. So that really wraps up everything that I had planned to share today about coaching. I squeezed literally about 3 hours into 50 minutes. Let me just take a moment and breathe. Okay, I'm good. I'm sure, Steve, there must be some questions. I'd be happy to answer questions now.
Questions, cheerleaders, a few critics. It's a mixed bag. All in all, Troy, some great questions here. First off, a lot of this is being pushed pretty hard as a way to contain healthcare costs. A lot of vendors really come out hard on the savings in healthcare costs with all these great coaching programs. In the review, what evidence do we have that coaching is saving healthcare costs?
None. There's no
As in
evidence.
zero.
As in zero. I spent some time in South Africa about 5 years ago, and I spent a lot of time working with one of the main carriers down there. They do have carriers that are involved in their insurance system. Without getting into the differences, this group had conducted one of the best studies I had ever seen on cost effect, on changes in behavior and clinical changes. They had thought of everything. They had measured everything, and without being lengthy, I will say that they showed me their data, and there was a negative return on investment. And that, to me, that makes a lot of sense, because they were trying to take one tool and they were trying to change the world with one tool. So I look at your backyard and say, can I take care of my backyard with a lawnmower or with a shovel? It's just not possible. You need lots of different tools. They had ignored the other tools. So yeah.
That brings us to a related question about the tool. And this is a common question we always get. But the tools for wellness, behavior change campaigns, health fairs, biometric screening, incentives, you understand it. Where do we rank coaching? I mean, if you were to, stack them up and rank them, and what people really want to know is, well, where should I spend my money? Because coaching is probably one of the priciest tools in the box. And if funds are limited, then based on your review and your understanding of the contents of the toolbox, where would you rank coaching, and kind of what's the best way to allocate funds that are pretty scarce?
Well, that's a really complicated question, and I would have just imagine being the principal at a school district who said, you know what, I'm really sorry, but we don't have the money for your classes for your advanced students, the ones who are academically gifted. We're going to have to cut that out. That's going to hurt at some point. We don't have money for the kids who have special challenges. That's going to hurt at some point, right? And so coaching has got to be included, I think, in a comprehensive intervention. And I would rank it probably on a scale of 1 to 10 at a 3 or 4. It's got to be included. I would say you can do without the newsletters unless they're part of a strategic communication plan. You can do without the health fairs. They're really not that effective in terms of changing behavior. They're great for raising awareness. They're cheaper ways to do it, though. But health coaching, I would say, but when you just look at it by itself, it's not going to be that effective. But when you add it to other things, you get a synergistic value. That's what's so significant. And remember what I shared earlier, that all the people in a population, the most who are ready to do anything, if you use national data and really provide some effective progress on health coaching, is 7%. It's probably less than that. So let's not spend money trying to coach 100% of the population when only 7% of the people are engaged. Instead, let's be smart and use data to tell us who we should coach. Let's spend money on those people who are most likely to change, the ones who are high risk and ready to change and willing to share their data. Now we've got something, and we can do something with the rest of the population.
Okay, well, Bert has asked a question. If there is no evidence for the cost saving side of health coaching, um, why is it so many companies are doing it?
Bert, if we could turn the time over to you, I would ask you the same question. I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea.
Okay,
I think it's because it's just sort of what's out there. I think the coaching industry's done a really good job of marketing itself, and it is so similar to the medical model that you go in, one doctor, one patient, one pill. People are used to that. So one coach, one coachee, one lifestyle prescription. The model makes a lot of sense, but there really is not the evidence to support its cost effectiveness at all. Again, I don't mean to don't shoot the messenger. That's just it is what it is.
so regarding the dose and the coaching methodology, we're getting several questions regarding face-to-face versus telephonic versus online video versus credentialed versus non-credentialed coaches versus those using motivational interviewing and those that not. So you've kind of stated the dose of the visits, 4 and 4 weeks, 4 or 6 and 6 weeks, but could you speak a little bit about to those other elements?
Sure. Well, look, I don't want to throw any philosophical method of coaching under the bus. I know a lot of mindfulness based coaching folks. This is a model that we use. Excuse me. Motivational interviewing is the method that WellSteps uses because there's the most evidence supporting that. There are lots of other great models out there, but here's the deal. What I found, and it, again, screamed out really loudly to me, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think my daughter, who is a 22-year-old special needs child, could be just an effective coach to help people with certain issues as someone with a master's degree and years of training, because people know that she cares. And a lot of you who've got training and who've got student loans are probably really mad at me, but the support piece is absolutely huge, and we cannot underestimate it. So I don't know that it matters whether you do it in person, whether you do it in face to face, how you do it. Peers were just as effective as trained health coaches in a couple of studies. A DVD was just effective as health coaches in one study. So what really matters is that people feel loved and supported. If you can do that and you can boil that down into a recipe for health coaching, I don't care how you do it, you're going to have a touchdown every time.
One of the things that happens in reviews of literature is that you're confined to just the published literature.
Sure.
Uh, and I've mentioned this to others at other time as researchers when we do this, and we're hired a lot of times by vendors to evaluate their programs. If we fail to find significance, many times, more often than not, those studies are buried. They never come out in the press. So since your review is limited to just the stuff that was published, one of our questions is, doesn't that suggest that the literature is a little bit biased towards only the best of the best of the best?
Of course, that's what it suggests. Of course, that's what it suggests. But keep in mind, by saying that, remember, 32 studies in the National Library of Medicine, 18 studies that were published said health coaching in this case didn't really do anything. It was really obvious to me as I read those studies why it wasn't effective. Because your intervention design was horrible. The dose was insufficient. The way that it was done it wasn't even coaching. That's why I think there may be, I'm not going to say we need a standard definition of coaching, but maybe we need to define a standard dose. What's an acceptable dose, and just kind of go from there. So yeah, there were probably a lot more studies that never got published and wound up in the trash can because there was no effect. And unfortunately, I don't have those. We can't learn much from those.
One more question regarding coaching those who are ready. What's an easy way to identify people who really deep inside want to change their lives?
Well, there are a couple of ways. There's some good stage algorithms if you want to correspond with me. I worked for about 10 years to do a literature review on the stages of change about a decade ago with several different researchers out there. We reviewed about 400 papers. I've got access to some really good stage of change algorithms. But what we did at WellSteps is we made it super simple. We have a personal health assessment. We ask about the modifiable lifestyle behaviors, if they're at medium risk or high risk. Then we ask them a question. It very simply says, would you like help changing this behavior? I only get asked that question if they're at risk for that behavior. And that way, it's very simple algorithm on the back end tells us, here are the people who are both at risk and who are ready to change. When we go to coach, we just email those that have said they're willing to share their data with the health coach, and bada boom. It winds up being, again, about 2 to usually more like 5% of the population who are actually ready to change. So it's not that hard. You can write your own question. I have some I can share with you, but it's pretty easy to do.
Troy, thank you so much for all the hard work. I know from a personal perspective, it takes literally a week or 2 or 3 to put these together. So we want to thank you for all your hard work in this. I see you've posted the webinar next month, June 20th, and we're going to talk about really the high cost cases. How does wellness integrate in with disease management, demand management? Where does the high deductibles play into this role? And how do we blend wellness into this intense need to control the high cost from the high cost patient? And what evidence, just like evidence on coaching, do we have for the disease management piece? Where is the place for that tool in this larger mix? So with that, again, Troy, thank you again for all your time and effort on this. And for all of you, good luck with your wellness efforts.
Thanks, everyone.